I hope you enjoyed part 1 with Chris, the Palestinian-born Australian. If you haven't seen that, please check it out on my YouTube channel. Today I will be doing part 2 with Robert from the AJA. And enjoy. All right, welcome everyone to the Maxy V podcast. Today I am in the studio with Robert Gregory, the CEO of the AJA, the Australian Jewish Association. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
All right. As we discussed it a little before, I wanted to have a conversation with both sides, but unfortunately we weren't able to get someone from the other side. So we have to do it with me today. Like the flags, I'm going to represent the Palestinian side today. And then hopefully we'll get someone from that side and I can represent the Israeli side to get both sides off the table. Yeah, let's just get straight into it. The most recent thing yesterday or day before, I believe, I'm not sure who it was because this is news for me as well, but someone said that it would not be a good idea for Jews to visit Australia at the moment because they're being targeted. How do you feel about that? What are your thoughts on that?
Look, it's shocking that in Australia in 2024 I would be seeing this sort of warning. The warning came from the Simon Wiesenthal Center in America, which is an international human rights organization. It was actually founded to track down Nazis. Never would have imagined it. The Australian Jewish community is largely descended from Holocaust survivors. They came here to escape these sort of issues. So it's very concerning.
Right. As a Jew, do you, after last year, do you feel targeted? Do you feel more threatened? Did life change after that?
So for me personally, because I work for a Jewish organization, very much targeted. We obviously have to take security precautions. We meet with counter-terror police very often. But for the average Jewish person, if you're identifiable in the streets of Australia, there are certain risks in certain neighborhoods. And then the statistics show there's been a massive increase in attacks, including violent attacks. So everyone's concerned about this.
Did you have any actual interactions? Like, did something ever happen? Like in the last year, like did you get called something, or do you experience things like that? Or
yeah, because I work for a Jewish organization, yes, I get a lot of death threats. I've had phone calls. We've even had
Is that over social media, or I'm talking about, do you ever feel threatened on the street? Like, say you're going grocery shopping, have you ever had a experience where someone would say something or threaten you, like in real life?
The closest it's come recently in real life is we've received like letters in the actual mail and phone calls. Somehow they've gotten the phone number, but nothing's happened since October 7 to me in the street. But I think particularly we hear a lot from rabbis, for example, that wear the black hat and look very, very Jewish. So they're all the time getting accosted in the streets.
Yeah. I was going to ask, what do you think about Trump being elected? Not about what you feel about that, but do you think him being elected is going to have an impact on the Israeli-Palestine war? And if so, in what way?
I think, with Trump, everything's a bit uncertain, but there's a lot of hope for positive change, and that's based on his previous term where he managed to work out peace deals between Israel and several Arab countries, including the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and I think if that's a priority for him, we could definitely see more peace talks. We know under the Trump term, we didn't have all these wars in the Middle East. There wasn't war in Gaza, in Lebanon, and he did defeat ISIS. So if it's a similar term, then I think there's a lot of hope that we could be heading in good direction. How do you think the alliances impact the Israeli-Palestinian war? Like you have, on the Israel side, you have America. On the other side, there's some Arab states. How do you think they influence the war? Well, I think one thing the Abraham's Accords, which is the peace between Israel and some Arab countries, one thing it showed is that peace between Israel and Arabs is possible. If any Arab country reaches out for peace, Israel is there, they'll make a deal. So I think that does influence it. Unfortunately, some of the alliances, particularly Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, we see behind a lot of these wars, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's between Israel and the people in Gaza.
So that's a very concerning one. But I think the Western alliance is important because the entire West is facing some of these issues. They're not unique to Israel and to Gaza. So I think it's important that the West, as an alliance, backs Israel.
Yeah, I was also going to ask, because this is, again, news to me, because this has been happening in the last week or so, the whole situation in Syria. And to be fair, I'm not really sure what happened in Syria. I'm more focused on what happened in Israel and Palestine. But obviously it is in the Middle East. It has a lot of, connections to Israel and Palestine. What do you feel about that? What are your thoughts on the whole Syria thing? Because there's a lot of people saying, oh, they're free now. But I was thinking, are they really? Because now what's going to happen to Syria? What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're 100% right. I mean, they got rid of a terrible, we shouldn't make any, mistake. Bashar Assad was one of the worst dictators in the entire world, killed 600,000 of his own people. So the fact he's gone is a reason to celebrate. But, as you said, it's very uncertain. It could be worse. Who are the people that defeated him? They seem to be, they come from Al-Qaeda originally. So, we could see a terrible situation, something like in Afghanistan where you have the Taliban, where people's rights are repressed, where women are repressed. So I think we should celebrate the fall of a dictator, but also be very concerned about what the future holds. Yeah.
All right, what do you think about that? That's a whole different story, but with the Taliban, like how America pulled out of Afghanistan and just, left them there to figure it out. How do you feel America handled that situation?
I think it was handled terribly, and I think we can see a direct chain between what happened in Afghanistan shortly after you had war in Ukraine, you had war in Gaza. I think showing weakness, like the Biden administration did, led to the world seeing America as weak. And one difference you'll notice between what happened in Syria and what happened in Afghanistan is that the United States left all their weapons for the Taliban.
Yeah.
Israel, over the last couple of days, has been completely destroying all the aircraft and missiles and chemical weapons in Syria so that it doesn't fall into the hands of terrorist groups.
Who did this, sorry?
Israel has been doing this. They've been conducting airstrikes over the last couple of days in Syria so the same thing doesn't happen. So we don't have chemical weapons and fighter jets in the hands of potentially Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not very knowledgeable on this topic, so I would have to investigate more to be able to know if what you're saying is correct or not, but I'll ask the next guest the same questions. What do you think about the mainstream media about this topic? Like, for example, I'm from the Netherlands. I'm not sure if you heard about this because it was international news, but there was a football game or soccer, whatever you want to call it, between Ajax Amsterdam and I think it was Maccabi Tel Aviv. It was a soccer game, and next day I see all these media posts about Maccabi fans or Jews or whatever what they call them, attacked by Muslim youth or Moroccans. So everybody's like, "Oh, what happened?" And the media claimed that Muslim youth or pro-Palestinians attacked the soccer fans. But then a couple of days later, other videos show up. Underground media or whatever you want to call it, and there was a very good, I wouldn't say documentary, but some reporter documented it from the beginning to start, and it shows that it was the Maccabi fans, like initially starting singing all these things about killing people or whatever. I'm not sure, I don't speak Hebrew, but they were starting a little chaos, climbing on buildings, tearing off Palestinian flags of just people who live there, violence. And then like I said, why do you think that the media is, I would say, very pro-Israeli? Why do you think that is? And
so that's, sort of two questions there. First of all, about the media, it's not our experience that it's pro-Israel. There are a couple of outlets we would say are, but in our experience, whether it's in Australia, and we can go into specific media if you want, or whether it's international, that it's quite anti-Israel. You'll often see facts distorted. You'll see them relying on figures, casualty figures from Gaza, for example, but they don't mention that the health ministry is run by Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. So they'll just say, the hospital said this when, not giving full details. And we can look at more about the media, but in particular about that case in Amsterdam, I mean...
Did you hear about that one?
Yeah. It was in the news here, I heard about it. Look, I mean, in terms of hooliganism in European football, the behavior of the Maccabi Haifa fans, it's not particularly crazy. I mean, obviously, racist chants, nobody's going to support that. Everyone will condemn it, but it's not, I mean, these things happen with hooligans in football. And I think the reaction to it, which was not by Ajax fans, like it was by, Arab residents. So it's not, you can't just say it was, football teams clashing. It was, groups of men of Middle Eastern background, hunting around the city, finding just anyone who's Israeli, who's not involved in these particular things, and forcing them to talk about Palestine, or chasing them, stealing their phones, their passports, posting videos online. So I don't think the response is at all justified by some chants, whether they may have been racist and should be condemned. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I condemn violence in any way, and you're right in saying, personally, I think this was more of a, football hooligans are always going to be football hooligans, whether they're Jew, Muslim, or whatever. But what I'm trying to bring up is the fact that, the first day it said, Israelis attacked, Jews attacked, not football fans. It was like they're really trying to frame it as if the Jews were attacked. Well, it's football supporters who initially started the violence and the chants and the stuff, and it was a retaliation, a reaction, and maybe obviously there's going to be people that just are looking to fight.
I don't think it was we could say it's just a fight. I mean, there were 10 Israelis went to hospital. Like I don't think anyone from the other side went to hospital. Like it was quite a serious incident particularly from one side. Whether the other sides had some chants or tore down a flag, I think the violence we saw was coming from one side.
Right. I mean, I've seen footage of violence from the other side as well. But yeah, like I said, I feel like the media was very, very much for showing one side and not the other. Like I'm not a Jew, I'm not a Muslim. I want everyone to be happy in a perfect world. But the fact that media nowadays, like we said before, is so either left or right. Like, why can't there be a middle? Why is there no neutral journalism anymore? That's what I'm trying to do now, like by interviewing you, and tomorrow someone from the other side.
Well, I think that we've seen around the world the growth in alternate media, in podcasts, in things like what you're doing, for those reasons, that the media is very polarized, and it is either right wing or left wing, and it's a concern. That's
exactly what I'm trying to do. There's been a lot of talk, especially nowadays, but this has been going on for dozens of years, if not centuries. The apartheid, or if that's what you can call it, in Israel, how do you feel about that? Do you think Arabs get treated differently versus Jews in Israel itself?
I mean, look, the only way I know of that Arabs are treated differently in Israel is that they're not required to go in the military, which is a huge benefit for them. They don't lose 3 years of their life, and they can go straight to university. But in terms of professions, they're Supreme Court justices, captain of the football team, politicians, directors of hospitals. So there's no, I mean, so my mother comes from South Africa, and the comparison with, she left while it was apartheid, and the comparison with apartheid South Africa, where there's separate water fountains for, based on skin color, and it's just very offensive to the struggle that people went through there. Arab citizens are fully part of Israel. They make up, almost 20% of the population. Arabic is an official language in Israel. They have political parties, but they are also in, they're part of, Jewish political parties. There's nothing apartheid about Israel.
All right. Yeah, like I said, I would have wished that the other side was here now to, debate you, because I don't have personal, knowledge about how it goes in Israel. But from what I've heard or from what I've researched, I can't remember his name. Anyway, he was an Arab Israeli, and he said, like, in the cities where it's mostly Arabs, they don't have as much schools. They don't have as much hospitals. Things like that. What do you think of that? Is that the case, or?
I mean, I think we can point to any country in the West, and you're going to find neighborhoods that are deprived. That, in America, for example, many people would say neighborhoods with African Americans don't have the same. We can't just call everything apartheid. People would say about Australia as well. There's Aboriginal communities where they don't have the same, resources. But I think, if you want to see apartheid in Palestinian Arab areas, Jews cannot live or they will die. Jews cannot enter Gaza. If a Jew does, they'll be kidnapped, they'll be killed. This is apartheid. The Palestinian Authority has the death penalty for selling land to a Jew.
Sorry, what was that? The Israeli?
The Palestinian Authority has the death penalty for selling land to a Jew. And it's been carried out before. So, I mean, I think the apartheid comparison, it's pretty ridiculous, to be honest. I mean,
all right. As a Palestinian would now probably reply, how come that they feel like they're being pushed out of the country and being pushed into Gaza, and they were all over the place, and now they have to leave. They were living in places, and then Jews come in and they basically kick them out. What are your thoughts on that? How do you see that issue?
I think the history of Palestinian Arabs, in one sense, is very tragic, what they've been through, and in another sense, it's completely caused by themselves. I mean, every time they start a war, they face repercussions. The most recent one, obviously, is October 7. I mean, if they wouldn't have done it, Gaza wouldn't be occupied now and have Israeli soldiers there. So, but this has been happening, every few decades. And originally, obviously, in 1948, when they rejected having a Palestinian state, and they instead started a war, which they lost, and they're now living with the consequences of their actions.
And obviously, the October 7th, was terrorism. But do you think the retaliation is appropriate? Like, when it happened and Israel responded, obviously they're going to respond. They're not going to be like, oh yeah, just you can bomb us or do whatever. They're going to respond. But do you think by now, a year later, the response, is still relevant? Because I believe it was about 1,200 to 1,500 people that died during the October 7 attacks. And I believe the number of Palestinians that have died is now into the 30,000, 40,000. Yeah, at what point would you say enough is enough? Or what's the solution?
Well, I think, Israel's response has two motivations behind it. The first one is to make sure what happened on October 7 will never happen again, that terrorist groups will never be in a position to carry it out. And we saw after October 7 that Hamas leader said, we're going to do this again and again. And so they won't be able to now. They're not able to at the moment. And I think Israel will be there, for the foreseeable future to make sure they can't. And the other part of Israel's response is to get the hostages back, to increase pressure on the terrorist group to release the hostages. So neither of those things have fully happened. So the war continues. It could end, it could have ended a year ago. It could end any minute if Hamas would surrender and release the hostages. They don't. So the war continues. But I think in terms of, just deaths, so it's true, 1,200, around about 1,200 Israelis were killed on October 7. The casualties for Gaza, as I said before, the health ministry in Gaza is run by a terrorist organization. So we do take it with a bit of grain of salt, and there is no independent, authorities in Gaza to give other figures. What we do rely on, the Israeli army estimates they've killed about 20,000 terrorists, which is, a lot. And obviously some civilians have died. That's what happens in war. But it's not how you measure, whether a war is just or not. I mean, the West, the good guys in World War II, killed a lot of civilians, whether they were German, whether they were Japanese. They were still the good guys. It was still important. They fought the war. They shouldn't have just stopped. And they had to completely win, which they did.
I hear what you say, but like you just said, they won in the end. And this, to me, as an outsider, now looks like, there's no end in sight. They're just bombing, and you see the footage of children missing their parents, children dying, babies dying, and it's like, Palestinians would call it a genocide. It has been called a genocide. There's enough people also from the Israeli side that are now saying what is his name? I think it was Moshe something, ex-defense minister of Israel, classified it as a genocide. So yeah, how do you see it going? Because yeah, again, it seems to not do anything. So how do you see, what's the solution? What's the end goal?
So, I mean, just a couple of things he said. So, Moshe Yaalon, I haven't seen him anywhere say it was a genocide. I did see him say it was ethnic cleansing. And I think specifically, I mean, it's a whole nother topic. He was a former defense minister under Netanyahu who was fired. So I think there's more to that story. And now he's a political opponent. Look, in terms of a genocide, if you want to see a genocide, you can look at what we mentioned before in Syria, with 600,000 dead. You can look at, for example, the Holocaust was a genocide. There's less Jews alive today than there was before in 1939. In Gaza, the population, despite the war going on, has just increased. So, I mean...
Okay, but then the argument would be that the population didn't increase because they're, doing it like rabbits, but because they're pushed into Gaza, and that's why, there's more people now, because from other places they were pushed into that space.
I mean, no one's come into Gaza really in the past year. Gaza does have a border with Egypt, which the Egyptians have, insisted on being closed. No Arab countries will take Gazans, so they are kind of stuck there. And it's strange for a war because, we saw the war in Ukraine. 5 million people. I think Poland alone took something like 5 million people. Like the neighboring countries wanted to help out, and they did help out. There's a lot of refugees. With Gaza, the Arab countries, Egypt has built huge walls on the border, and no one will leave Gaza. They want the civilians to stay there. It looks good for them in the media when they get killed, which is unfortunate.
What do you mean? Sorry?
They're using it, in the media. They're letting Gaza civilians die, keeping them in a war zone.
In the Egyptian media, you mean? Or?
I mean, in the world media. It distracts from issues, A lot of Arab countries are not very democratic, Egypt included, and rather than let the people be angry with their own government, it's easier to let them have an enemy that they can be angry about, and you see that a lot in the Arab world. With Al Jazeera, they spend all the Arab countries, or most of them, have a lot of serious problems, but they spend a lot of their day worrying about the Jews and Israel. So this Gaza was very useful for them.
So you're saying that in this case, Egypt closes the borders, so more people die, so that it's like propaganda. That's basically how I understand what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I think it's strange. You don't see many war zones where usually the neighboring countries help out. Whether it was in Yugoslavian wars, they went into neighboring that's normally what decent countries do. But just in terms of genocide, the accusation, Israel would have to be very bad at genocide. They delivered over 1 million vaccinations to the population. There's hundreds of trucks of aid enter every day. They don't. They're good at many things, but they're not very good at genocide.
Again, the counter argument would be that these aid convoys have been bombed as well, trying to cut off the water supply, things like that. That's what you would do in a genocide. If you can have access to water, then life's going to be very difficult.
So I don't know of another war zone where one side attacks the other and the other side supplies them water, electricity. Like it's a very, you would never see it. Like it's not, I keep bringing other examples in wars, but you don't see in another war zone that the attacked side is still supplying all the facilities for the other side. And Israel continues to do that. There has been I'm aware, particularly there was an incident where an aid convoy was hit where an Australian aid worker was killed. It was a very big news story here and very tragic. It was a case of misunderstanding. There were armed gunmen standing on the convoy, which apparently the Israeli people controlling the drones thought they were terrorists. It turns out they were armed guards protecting the convoy. So obviously it's war. Misunderstandings happen. There was an investigation. There was apologies from Israel, and but I'm not aware of many other incidents of that sort of nature.
To be fair, I find it hard to trust anything nowadays because of AI, because of people just showing one side. So it is very hard to see what is real and what's not. But I have seen enough footage from either side, but also from the Israeli side of soldiers, I would say, misbehaving themselves, like doing things to people they capture, or shooting children, things like that. I would consider that war crimes. And like I said, a lot of things are not real that you see on social media. But then again, there's definitely been cases like that.
I mean, so I've certainly seen cases of misbehaving, and I think a lot of that is explained by Israel's army is a conscript army. It's not a professional army. These are not career soldiers. They're 18-year-old kids. I mean, imagine, all the 18-year-old guys, in Australia and the Netherlands and what they do. So it is a conscript army. But it does have, when these incidents happen, it has a very good independent legal system that prosecutes them. So, I mean, many people might know the Israeli legal system is considered like the prime minister is currently on trial. So it's not, this is a legal system that, and a previous prime minister has gone to prison. So it's not afraid to prosecute where there are, misbehavior. And I have seen misbehavior. I have not seen, shooting children, those type of things. Obviously, children, die unintentionally in war. That's, when Hamas positions, weapons, in schools or around children, that's obviously they're going to die. But I haven't seen, soldiers shooting children like that.
So, what do you think the Palestinians should do? Because obviously it's Hamas that is in control, and as long as they are in control, they're not going to change. Obviously we're not going to solve the war in a podcast in Australia. But how do you see things going? What needs to happen for this to stop?
So, I mean, the easy answer is, the Palestinian Hamas needs to surrender, release the hostages. But from the Palestinian people, as polls consistently show, there's high support for October 7. Hamas is the elected government. There's high support for Hamas. And we just haven't, I often bring back to Europe in World War II. We have there's about 20,000 people recognized as, righteous among the nations. Non-Jewish people in Europe who risk their lives, who save Jews. We haven't seen, I'm not aware of a single person in Gaza. Now, we have about 100 hostages. Israel's offered a reward of $5 million for a hostage. Nobody's come forward. Obviously, a lot of people know what's going on. So I think from the Palestinian people, we just haven't seen, and I know a lot of people say, well, Hamas is a terrorist group. They're afraid for their lives to protest. We see all around the world people standing up to, we see in Iran, people protest the evil dictatorship there. They risk their lives. We just saw, as we spoke about in Syria, people taking on people take on evil dictatorships. From the Palestinian people, we haven't seen any attempt at all to renounce terrorism, any attempt to, from the people to overthrow Hamas, to turn against them. And until we see that, there's not going to be, peace between Jews and Arabs. Israel has offered the Palestinians state on many occasions. They always turn it down. And I think after October 7, there is no one in Israel, not from the government, not from the left-wing opposition, that would support the Palestinians having a state. We saw, Gaza's the closest it came to having a state. We saw, they elected a terrorist group. They killed their neighbors. No one's going to risk that. So I think, it's until their culture changes, until their education system changes, until they're not brought up, wanting to kill Jews, there's not much can be done.
Well, how do you do that?
So a lot of it, what we can do in the West pays for everything for the Palestinians. So their international aid, everything, their schools, so we could attach some strings. Australia gives a lot of money which funds textbooks that teach Arabs to children to kill Jews. That when they learn mathematics, they learn, if one killed Jew plus two, they learn crazy things. So
yeah, I wouldn't know if this is true. I couldn't. Yeah.
Even the European Union's, commissioned a lot of reports into it. So, I mean, from the West, that's what we can do. We can help the Palestinians understand this is a war they started, a war they lost. They have to suffer the consequences, and until their culture, and as we...
Yeah, that was the question from 10 minutes ago. They have to suffer the consequences, but for how long? Because, again, it doesn't seem to be an end, and I understand that October 7 was a terrorist act, and I understand that Hamas is in control, but I also know that most people are just citizens, and they are the ones, taking the damage. So again, how will we make life better for them? Because Israel at this point is not going to do that, and Hamas is not going to do that either. So we're like on a stalemate that just seems to be more bombings. So yeah, that's the question. Like, how do we stop that from happening?
I think it's not up to us. It's not up to the West. It's not up to Israel to make life better for them. The Palestinians need to make some choices. They need to stop electing terrorist organizations. Stop,
But how far is it elected? Because if it's a terrorist organization, then you can also imagine they're not playing fair when there's elections.
Well, they did win the election. I haven't seen many people doubt it, and the polls taken again and again by international polling companies show there is massive support, over 70% for terrorism, for Hamas, for October 7. This is not, we can't kid ourselves. So what can we do? I think the best example we need to look at, which I brought up these examples a lot, is the German people elected the Nazis, and they suffered terribly because of it. They suffered a lot, but in the end, they learned, because they lost the war so badly, and they were made to suffer, and they completely changed. And now Germany is a productive, contributing nation in the world. They renounced all these terrible things because Nazism was defeated. The same in Japan. Nobody thinks that that Japan is a risk to the world, and they forget that a few decades ago Japan wanted to take over the world, and they did horrible crimes, and Pearl Harbor, and kamikaze bombers. So people can change, but they need to. We need to stop helping them. Stop trying to save them from their own mistakes, and let them help themselves.
A little more about the roots of the conflict. Obviously, Palestinians feel like they have the right to certain land. You hear from the river to the sea. I'm not even sure what river and what sea, but and Israel obviously finds that they are the rightful owner of the land. But this goes, back decades, if not centuries, if not thousands of years. How do you see? Yeah, how do you think it's shaped into what it is now?
Well, I think, you're not the only one that, doesn't know from what river, from what sea. We often see scenes when, in Palestinian protests in universities and in the West, people often ask them, you're shouting from the river to the sea, what river, what sea, and they often themselves don't know. How did it start? The sort of short answer, Israel, Palestine, whatever you want to call it, there's only ever been, one people have had a country there. That's the Jewish people, who have had it several times. There's been foreign occupiers, the Romans, the Ottomans, the British. The Jews were obviously expelled. Most of the Jews, there's always been a Jewish presence in the land of Israel. There's always been Jews there, but most were expelled, and we obviously know how that went. Exile. Jews never gave up on returning home. Whenever they could, they did. When they were expelled from different countries, and as soon as conditions became better, a lot more Jews started returning home, and they built up a beautiful, amazing country. There was the Arabs came in about the year 700. Was the Arab invasions after the creation of Islam of the Holy Land and the Crusades and all that. So what we would today call the Palestinians, which is a very modern term. They didn't identify themselves as that until the 1960s. Previously, they were just Arabs or Bedouins, or they didn't have this sort of national idea. So some of them do come from the sort of Arab invasions that happened, and then some of them come much more recently when the Jewish obviously when cities like Tel Aviv were built. Obviously it attracted a lot of people to work in the kibbutzes. So a lot of Arabs from neighboring countries came there. And then some of them, as the borders were drawn, for example, the Bedouins, they're a nomadic people. The
what, sorry?
Bedouin?
I've never heard that term, no.
So they're sort of like Arabs that, they're nomadic. They travel, they don't have one country. They live in Jordan, in Arabia. And when the borders were drawn, so some got stuck here, some got stuck there. They obviously live there. But at a certain stage, one of the sad things for the Palestinians is they always pick the wrong side in a war, and they suffered. So, in World War I, the Arabs there took the side of the Ottoman, the Turkish, which lost to the British. So they, the British, the British were given a mandate by the international community to help a Jewish homeland with the Balfour Declaration. And they did that, and the Arabs, unfortunately, in World War II also took the side of the Nazis. Well, I mean, obviously the Jews were fighting with the British. So again, they made a lot of mistakes. And probably their biggest mistake was in 1948 when the United Nations offered a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jews said yes, even though it was very small, much smaller than it is today. The Arabs said no. 7 countries invaded. They lost. And they've never given up the dream of destroying the Jewish state. I mean, if they wanted to build something, for themselves. So in 2005, Israel left Gaza. They expelled every single Jewish person there because they knew, a single Jew would be killed. They even dug up the Jewish graves because they would be desecrated. They left behind billions of under Israel, before 2005, Gaza was thriving. It was producing a lot of agriculture. The Jewish communities were very productive. It's a beautiful place. I mean, it's on the Mediterranean Ocean. There's beaches. It could be, like the Greek islands. But after Israel left, the international community purchased for the Palestinians billions of dollars worth of greenhouses, of agriculture. So, Israel left it behind. It was bought by, I think, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and different organizations. The Arabs, they destroyed it and they used it to, what did they do? They invented rockets to fire into. They dug up sewage pipes, put explosives and fired rockets into Israel. So Israel invented the Iron Dome to shoot down the rockets. So the Arabs dug tunnels under. So Israel invented technology to stop the tunnel. All they turn their mind to is, trying to destroy their neighbor. Instead of building, they could build a Singapore, they could build a Dubai, they could make a beautiful society, which they don't.
Yeah, it was another reason, because you mentioned Egypt not taking refugees. What would be another reason for the Arab states surrounding the conflict not taking in Palestinians, in your eyes? So
the Arab states want to continue the wars that they've lost, and it's an easy way to do it, to use the Palestinians. What we've seen, so there were 2 exchanges of population. I mean, there was a few around 1948. So, every refugee crisis from then has been solved. Whether it was, Europeans being expelled from different countries, whether it was between India and Pakistan, they don't have a refugee crisis anymore. 800,000 Jews were expelled from Arab countries, from the Middle East. There's no more Jews in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in all these places where 800,000, many more than Arabs left Israel. But what's the difference? Why are they not refugees? Because the Jewish state took them in, built refugee camps, settled them, integrated them, and they became productive members of Israel. The Arab countries. So in the 1948 war, a lot of Arabs stayed in Israel. There's over, as we said, about 20% of the population is Arab. They didn't all leave. The ones that stayed are doing very well. They're working in high tech. They're working in, some ridiculous percentage of pharmacists. They're doing quite well. The ones that left went to neighboring Arab countries, and they were. If you want to see apartheid, look how Palestinians are treated in Lebanon, for example, where they're, even after living there for generations, they're not given citizenship. There's a list of occupations they cannot do. So, why weren't they taken in? Well, I mean, they were quite destabilizing wherever they went. They led to a civil war in Lebanon. Some went to Kuwait and they backed Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. They, caused a civil war almost in Jordan. But yeah, they could easily be resettled. That's there's no other refugee crisis from the 1940s still going on. But unfortunately, in the United Nations, they want to continue this situation. So they build refugee camps and they tell these people, don't worry, one day you'll return home. Even though none of these people, they're all now great-grandchildren of people who may have once lived somewhere. Nobody tells, I'm descended from refugees. My dad actually was a refugee, from communism in Hungary. Nobody tells me, I have a right to go back home. And, it's like the world moves on and I'm resettled. And this is what needs to happen with the Arabs, the Palestinian Arabs.
You mentioned the United Nations. What would their motivation be to do that then? Because you would imagine the United Nations is created to help people. So
you would imagine, but if you look at the majority of countries in the United Nations are dictatorships. They're not democracy. So everyone has a vote, an equal vote, whether it's North Korea. Unfortunately, most countries are not run by people who have good intentions, and this is the international system. Even the Security Council, Russia, China, they have veto power. So it's nice to imagine, it's a great body wanting to help everyone, but the reality is it's different countries acting in their own interest, or not even their own interest, in their own government's interest.
Yeah, that's a whole other debate, but there's a lot of conspiracy theories about why certain countries help. But yeah, let's not get into that too much. What do you think of the movement now that came up a couple of months ago, the LBTG? I don't know. Sorry if I said it wrong, but the group I'm talking about, the Queers for Palestine.
I think they should, imagine queers in Palestine. They should visit the place they support and see how they're received. Visit Gaza and tell people who they are, and they won't survive. Obviously, I mean, gay people are thrown off buildings, so it's ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. This is more a question for the other side, but I agree. That's very weird to me. We already spoke a little about the role of the media in this, but why do you think it is so focused on Israel and Palestine? Because, like you mentioned before, you have issues in Yemen, multiple other countries where there's bombings every day for years or even decades. Why do you think those are never really mentioned in legacy media, but it's all focused on Israel-Palestine?
Well, we say no Jews, no news. People, obviously these type of issues get a lot of attention, and it's a tragedy because we see what's going on in neighboring countries. I mean, in a practical sense, one explanation I've heard is that imagine you work for CNN or BBC. Do you really want to send your journalist to live in Syria and report from there, or Iraq, Baghdad? But it's, if you want to have a Middle East bureau, you put it in Israel because it's a Western country, it's nice. And so literally there are, hundreds, thousands of journalists permanently positioned in Israel, and they need to produce stories for the international media. So that's sort of a practical explanation that, they're not really going to set up a huge headquarters in Yemen. So that's, but I think, you see, I mean, we've seen a lot of protests at universities around the world. No university students protest for Syria, for Yemen. Even when a lot of groups, even we saw the Taliban who oppress women, you think feminism or, gay rights, these are issues these people really like, and they just don't care about it. Perhaps another reason is that a lot of it is based on a deep-seated hatred of the West. So a lot of these same people, they hate America, they hate Britain, they hate Western ideas, Christianity. So Israel is seen as, obviously Christianity comes from Judaism. A lot of Western ideas, are connected. Israel's an ally of America. So this is a way to sort of protest against the West, against their own countries that they may not like.
And you mentioned universities. Why do you think most universities, and I would say most people, are pro-Palestinian? Why do you think that is?
Well, when we say most people, I mean, I deal with a lot of Australians, and, on one hand, I see a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of, we see big protests against Israel. And you're right, a lot of university students attend, a lot of, people from Middle Eastern communities. But I think the average Australian, and I'm sure this is true in many countries, they either don't care, they're not involved, or what we do find is we receive a lot of messages, a lot of support from, Australians, particularly older Australians, particularly, in rural areas, Western Australia, Queensland, that, they obviously don't get the media attention because, again, there's not, they're not out protesting in the street. They're just normal people who are working jobs and, not burning things down or burning flags. So I think sometimes what we see in the media can be a bit deceptive. The loudest are not always representing the most people. But I think it's a problem in the university system where people are being brought up to hate the West. They're being taught, some of these radical professors are teaching them to hate their own countries. They'll often burn their own national flags. And it's not just Australia. You'll see, the same thing happens in America, happens and I'm sure it happens in European countries too. So.
But yeah, again, most of what I see is pro-Palestina. In Europe, in Australia, when there's protests or whatever, they're mostly pro-Palestina. While I reckon most mainstream media is more pro-Israel in my eyes, how I see how it's been, represented in the media. So how come you think that, especially you mentioned old people, you get a message for old people, why do you think it's mostly young people on the left that are very pro-Palestinian? What's the reason for that?
I think they're looking for a cause. They're lost. Young people, they don't have the same sort of historical knowledge. They don't know what's been going on for decades. They don't understand the context. They don't understand why the Jewish state was created. They don't. They may not be aware how many times the Palestinians have been offered a country. I mean, young people now, like as I get older, some of the young people, they don't even remember, September 11th. They don't remember how the West fought against radical Islam and the threats that it poses. Obviously we've had attacks in Australia as well. They're forgetting what sort of a struggle is going on in the world, and I think it's unfortunate. I mean, some people are more hopeful. They say, as you grow older, people get more mature, and we certainly, the university protests from the 1960s and 70s, they're now, considered quite conservative people that have different positions. So is this just a stage people go through, and do they grow up, or is this a sign of things to come? It's hard to say.
Yeah, I think most of it is just social media nowadays, especially young people. They're very would you call it, influenceable, and they just repeat what they hear a lot. That's what I think happens. And on either side, like we said before, people are just in their little bubble, and it's very hard for them to come out of that bubble. What else? Would there be anything you want to discuss or tell the viewers, listeners?
I mean, look, I think you're covering everything very well. I would maybe just say, I think what's important to understand for that the Palestinians, the Arabs should understand, and the whole world should understand, is that there's one Jewish nation in the entire world. There's dozens of Arab countries. There's dozens of even more Muslim countries. There's even other countries have a majority of Palestinians. There's one country in the world the Jews have, which they've never ever given up on. All of Judaism revolves around the land of Israel. Religious Jews pray facing Jerusalem, several times a day, whereas Muslims, even if they're standing in Jerusalem, they turn their back and pray towards Mecca. Like this is, Jerusalem, Israel it's central to Judaism, to every festival, every Jewish wedding you see, they smash a glass. I'm not sure if you've seen they usually smash a glass at a Jewish wedding to remember the destruction of Jerusalem. So it's, and finally the Jewish people were able to return and have a country, and they understand what it's like to live in other people's countries, and to not have a state. And it's not just the Holocaust, it's not just pogroms, it's not it's expulsions from Spain, it's thousands of years of persecution. So the Jewish people are not going anywhere, and it's very important that the Palestinians in the world understand that their dream, their desire to drive if they just blow up enough buses, if they just do October 7th, the Jews are going to pack up. The Jews have nowhere to go. They're not going anywhere. So we need to learn to live together, to work together in whatever way we can. And I think in some sense, from the Jewish perspective, we offered many times that the Palestinians have a state. I don't think there would be that offer again from the Jewish side. I think they wouldn't take that risk. But we have to see in what ways we can work together, whether that's on a local level, whether we can, communities can work together, we can shop in each other's places, we can, see each other's doctor, in that sort of sense.
I hope to see it one day. How do you think, because obviously Jews, like you just mentioned, everything you said, they have their state, this is their only state in the world, but why do you think Muslims, in this case, feel like they have the right on that land, and the Islamic people should have that land? What's their reason for it in your eyes? Because obviously it's a religious thing.
Yeah, so I mean, I understand, from the Islamic perspective, it's obviously very humiliating. You've got this tiny group, that just survived the Holocaust, refugees that beat, 7 countries and, defeated, very large Arab empires. And you have, in the Middle East, one tiny little, every other minority in the Middle East is being persecuted and disappearing. Christians are leaving the Middle East, wherever we see. So it's becoming just Muslim Arabs, as everyone else is being chased out. There used to be large communities, and except you've got this tiny little Jewish state, and it's very different to its neighbors. It's it's like when you see the border of North Korea and South Korea, and one's very lit up. Israel's a center of high tech. It's a booming economy. It's a thriving place with democracy and rights for women and gays and all these things. And unfortunately, many Islamic Arab countries, the people are poor, they suffer, they're repressed, they're killed by their own leaders, and obviously they don't want this tiny state there. But in terms of Islam, I mean, Palestine, they're not mentioned in the Quran. This is not, a lot of people think this is some old ancient dispute. It's become religious in more recent times, but it's not. The holiest place for Islam is Mecca, Medina in Saudi Arabia, and this is their focus.
Yeah. It's hard for me to imagine. I'm not religious at all. Like I said, I'm from the Netherlands. I think all 4 of my grandparents are atheists, which is very rare for their age. So I grew up without religion. It's hard for me to imagine, because it's been so long, thousands of years. If you wanna go back thousands of years and we say, oh yeah, because we were there then this is our right to have this, then Australia wouldn't be for Australians either, because there was the Aboriginals who were here first. Then everybody should have to leave the United States because that was from the Native Americans. So I find it hard to have an opinion on who should be the rightful owner of a certain land, because I think everyone should have the right to live anywhere. I'm an immigrant. What are your thoughts on that?
100%. I mean, there are some differences. Aboriginals and Native Americans, they don't have the concept of there wasn't one nation, a country. It wasn't especially I know more about Australia. There wasn't concept of land ownership, these type of things. But Israel is a nation for all its people. So while it is the only Jewish state in the world, obviously all citizens are equal. There's Muslims, Christians. So it's not it's not saying it's only for Jews. It's saying it is the only Jewish place in the world where everyone is welcome, or at least Jews should have not have to when they need to flee, which they often do from places, then they should have a place. But it's not just a religious thing. I mean, obviously to certain people there's a religious thing. It's it's a historical thing. It is the Jews never they had a nation there which was destroyed by the Romans, and they never gave up on it. It's just, this has always been a Jewish land. There has never been, if you look in history, before the Jews, so the British ruled it, but the British didn't consider it part of Britain. It was a territory, and before them was the Ottomans, ruling from in Turkey, and they didn't,
What do you think of, because you mentioned the Brits, I did a little research on the history, and how I see it is the Brits were basically like promising the Jews certain stuff and the Arabs certain stuff for their own gain. And then when it got too heated, they were like, all right, no, you know what? You guys now figure it out. That's how I see it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a very accurate reflection.
Yeah.
The British started off with good intentions when they came in, and they, obviously it was, they promised to recreate the Jewish homeland. They never took the land, to make it part of Britain. They were only there, it was called the mandate. When they say the mandate, there was a mandate for a Jewish state, and this was, by the precursor of the United Nations, which was called the League of Nations, gave them this mandate and said, this is why you're here. Unfortunately, what happened is there was an Arab uprisings, were very violent. Many Jewish people were killed, also many British people, and the British, didn't honor it. What happened is, closer to World War II, the British saw, okay, the Jews are going to support us in World War II because they don't have a choice. They're not going to support the Nazis, but the Arabs, many were supporting the Nazis, and it was quite important to Britain to keep the Arabs on side because there were a lot of oil reserves being discovered in other places in Iraq, in Arabia. So the British, which is passed something called the White Paper. So even though they had their only legal justification to be there was to create a Jewish homeland, they restricted heading into World War II in the late 1930s. They said no more Jews can come to the Mandate of Palestine, and as Jews would flee Germany, the British would attack the boats, turn them back, killed people, and we obviously know whoever was sent back to Germany obviously died. So the British do bear some responsibility for what happened. Obviously they didn't carry out the Holocaust, but they did stop the people fleeing, and the reason they said they did that was because of the Arab uprising. Then after World War II, the British they just said enough. By that time the Jews also were in an uprising against the British to get rid of them after what had happened, and the British said we're leaving. The United Nations can solve the problem, and that's when the United Nations split the land. So,
right.
But you see, what we touched on before, the British and the French. There is a lot more terrible things they did in the Middle East, and the reason we're seeing wars in Syria and it's because they drew lines on a map. Besides for Israel, which has history as a Jewish homeland, the countries around there are fake countries. They're invented by European people. Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. They don't. There is no historic Jordan on the. They were invented. They drew lines on a map. They didn't consider the people living there. Who don't care about countries. They care more about, either religious loyalty, whether they're Sunni or Shia, or racial, whether what tribe they're from, whether they're Kurdish or Druze. The people, that's why we see wars in Iraq, in Syria and everywhere because of these lines on a map.
Yeah, I think it's, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's similar in Africa. Because that's why all these lands are basically,
straight lines.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, again, that's a topic for another podcast because I'm a little bit of a conspiracy theorist sometimes, or at least I like to investigate them, and I do think that most wars are not about religion at all. It's about money, or especially like America or the European Union, whatever. They should be minding their own business and say, okay, you guys figure it out, but they are there, what I think, to make money. All these wars, they create so much, billions of dollars in the weapon industry. Same with the Ukraine-Russia thing.
War's big business, yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Do you agree with that, or?
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of examples. I think there's a huge industrial, war complex in America, and I'm sure it's similar in other countries. And it's big business, and we have to sometimes stand up to these people. Because innocent people die in wars. I mean... Yeah, exactly.
That's the whole problem. Robert, I want to thank you so much for coming. This was an interesting conversation. Again, I tried my best. It was a little different than I expected it to be, but I will have a conversation with someone on the Palestinian side. We'll see how that goes.
Thank you for doing this. I think these conversations are very important. So
that's what I think as well. I would like people to, have more of these conversations instead of just yelling at each other. Thank you for coming. We'll see what happens. Maybe we can do this again sometime.
Love that.
And that's it. Thanks everyone for watching, and see you next time. Thank you for watching part 2. We've heard both sides, but what do you think? Were your questions answered? Please let me know in the comments.